Chapter 5: What's in a Name? Caleb woke up the next morning feeling refreshed. He looked at his clock and was surprised to find he'd woken up 10 minutes before his alarm was set to go off. He turned off the alarm and laid back down to enjoy the time he had before he needed to get up. As he stared at the ceiling, he thought of the conversation he'd had the night before with his older self. He was beginning to feel more optimistic about his future and was excited for all the things he now knew lay ahead of him. With hard work and perseverance, he could accomplish anything. He'd go to university, learn how to time travel, and make his family proud. It was all so positive, although he admitted to himself that he did feel somewhat anxious about the hard work bit. His 10 minutes up, Caleb swung his legs off the side of the bed and noticed the notepad on his nightstand. The video he had watched the night before had suggested leaving it within reach of the bed so he could jot down notes in the night. He vaguely remembered writing something before falling asleep, and then again in the middle of the night. He couldn't recall what he had written though. He reached for the notepad and studied it, curious to see what he had scratched out overnight. On the paper there appeared to be a list of some kind. It took him a few looks before he was able to decipher the scribbles. It was a list of things that had been concerning him. One of the problems he was having was in math. The little note said something about arranging for a tutor, since a program had just started up at his school. He'd have to talk to Dad about that and get a note of permission. Also, he knew that he needed some extra things for his studying and for getting things organized. He knew he would need a little extra cash. Scribbled on the notepad were some ideas about some jobs that he could do. The words lawn cutting, watering, pruning, cleaning and paper delivery were scrawled across the page. There was also a question mark and the word Dad. He remembered that he had thought about asking his dad about whether he could get some cash for extra chores. The fact that he couldn't remember what he had written was proof of the fact that getting things onto the paper and out of his mind was a successful and powerful strategy. There was no doubt that getting his thoughts down on paper had helped him get a great sleep. As he prepared himself for school, he looked over his notes one more time. Talking to his dad about a part-time job or chores, he thought, would probably be better to leave for later in the day. Feeling good about how he was now strategically planning his day, he tore that note off his pad and put it under his stapler right in the middle of his desk. There was no way that he would miss that when he came home from school. He thought he should act right away on the other note, about getting a math tutor. He knew there were going to be a limited number of opportunities in that program. He was very thankful that he had remembered, so he could get the permission letter from his dad. Otherwise, he might miss out. I really need to thank my older self and those student friends of his from the future, Jarvis, Abby, Priya, and Ethan, Caleb mumbled to himself. He held that note in his hand as he went down to breakfast, so he wouldn't forget to talk to his dad. It was a busy morning as Caleb and his dad rushed around making breakfast and preparing for their days. There wasn't much time to sit down and talk, but Caleb did manage to broach the subject of the permission slip. As his father wrote the letter requesting the tutor, Caleb shoveled cereal into his mouth and decided he'd made the right call to leave the other conversation for later. Caleb had begun his school day with a growing sense that life was definitely going to get better. Now he was finally making attempts at all of his school tasks. In the few short weeks since he'd made changes, his teacher, Mr. Badial, had noticed he seemed to be trying more of his work and had complimented him. He still wasn't producing what you would call quality work, and he wasn't completing assignments properly yet, but at least he was trying. Caleb had also been approved for a tutor. He knew that was going to be a huge help. As the day unfolded, the dread he felt in the morning about all the hard work he would need to do became a reality. Every lesson came with another assignment, and the homework list in his agenda was suddenly spilling into the margins. He was depressed when he left school at the end of the day. His morning optimism had all but evaporated, replaced with anxiety at the thought of the mountain of homework he would now need to overcome. The familiar feeling of drowning in a sea of work had returned. Sadly, he also realized he wouldn't have any free time for fun in the foreseeable future. As he reached the park, he took a seat on what was now becoming his favorite tree trunk, to watch a flock of snow geese. The cackling and honking in the field before him got his mind off his problems for a bit. Fascinated, he watched the sentry geese, those on the edges of the flock, keeping their heads up and rotating, watching for dangers so the other geese could enjoy their grass meals. Caleb had arranged to meet his friends at the park, but he was now regretting that. He had so much work to do. How was he going to get his work done and have time with his friends? So consuming were his thoughts, that he wasn't aware of someone coming up behind him. It was his older self. Caleb looked up, his eyes wordlessly seeking help. Sensing his troubled state, his older self sat quietly next to him on the tree trunk. "I don't know what I'm gonna do. This is all too much for me. I honestly don't know what I'm gonna do," Caleb muttered, looking to his older self in despair. "Hey, don't forget, you are talking to someone who understands and can help. And get that sour look off your face. You've started on the path to getting things better, but you should know that it's not going to happen overnight. There is much you still have to learn. Have some patience. Give it some time. You've made some really positive steps," Caleb's older self counseled. While they chatted at the park, his older self shared how to go about the proper use of a daily agenda planner, along with how to organize and approach learning tasks. Caleb discovered that it was possible to do all this organizing on paper as well as on electronic devices such as phones, iPads, and computers. It wasn't long before Caleb had pulled out his little notepad and started making some scratchy notes. Maybe things were going to be okay. He could feel his mood lighten as he realized the ideas being given to him would help him right away. He had paper organizers to get started with, but his mind was working out how he could make better use of his computer so the schedules and lists could all be online. Caleb looked at his watch and realized his friends would be there soon. He looked at his older self and suddenly began to wonder how he would explain who his older self was. "You're not a ghost or an hallucination, are you? Other people can see you? My friends are going to be here any minute. How do we explain who you are?" Caleb asked. Nope, not an hallucination. Don't worry, I've done this before, remember?" his older self admonished. Later in the learning strategies, you'll be using some memory techniques to remember lists of things. They involve taking the first letter of each word in a list and figuring out a way to remember the letters and then the list. It's a very powerful tool and you'll have fun using it. Actually, the letters in the title of the program I've set up for you, Clever Quick, each stand for a part of the learning management strategies. So far, you've encountered the C for concentration and the L for learning tasks, something I just started talking to you about today. You'll learn what the other letters stand for soon enough, but we don't have time now. Okay. But that still doesn't answer how I'm going to explain who you are, Caleb said, desperately trying to understand where his older self was going with this. "Yeah, so what I'm saying is let's apply it. I'm Caleb from the future. Could we rearrange the letters in our name into something else?" his older self suggested. Okay, we have a C, an A, an L, an E and a B, Caleb ticked off. "What about Belloc? Or April? Maybe Blaze?" "Blaze? Sure, that works, and let's pronounce it like Blaze. That way it sounds cool and fast," his older self agreed. "Now, how are we going to say we know each other?" Well, you're my older self." "Or Caleb's older self?" C-O-S? Cousin. "Yeah, you're my cousin," Caleb exclaimed triumphantly. "Wait, don't say anything more, here come my friends. Hi Asher, hi Grace. Glad you could come by. I've got someone to introduce you to," Caleb called out when they were still a little way from the fallen tree. Caleb had been friends with Grace and Asher for pretty much as long as he could remember. He considered them his best friends, their families were close, so they had spent a lot of time together when they were younger. This year, they were all in the same class at school, so that was a real bonus. Grace was a quick-witted, studious, 12-year-old with a high-energy positive attitude toward everything. Tall for her age, she had long auburn hair and piercing hazel eyes. She complemented that look with clothing choices that really set her apart. When she was able, she always chose bright colors and bold patterns. You could always pick her out in a crowd. Her giving, generous attitude, and unwavering sense of fairness endeared her to just about everyone. People often noted that she was fun to be around. Caleb most definitely agreed. Asher was her 11-year-old cousin. He had calming blue eyes and a mischievous grin, topped off by a mop of brownish blonde hair. Adults referred to him as charming. He seemed to have an effect on people that made them like him. Caleb thought enviously that he must be friends with just about everyone in the school. His uniform consisted of sports pants, along with a variety of t-shirts, many in bright colors and some with witty sayings. Today his shirt said, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." He was very adventurous, always eager to learn new things and explore new places. As well, he was constantly looking for interesting angles on things he encountered. This made him fun to be around, even though it did lead to some classroom difficulties. He often saw humor in things that other people didn't. The timing of his side comments and laughter were not always appreciated by his teachers. "Who's this?" Grace queried. "This is Blaze. My cousin." Pronounced like Blaze, but spelled B-L-A-C-E, Caleb responded. "Blaze, these are my friends, Grace and Asher." "Hi Blaze," Asher said, sticking out his hand. "Grace and I are cousins as well." "I didn't know Caleb had a cousin in town," Grace added. "Nice to meet you both, Grace and Asher," Blaze began. "I'm not exactly from here anymore. I've moved on. Now I'm in another place and time in my life." Caleb couldn't contain himself and began giggling at Blaze's response. Grace looked at them with her head tilted slightly. There was something odd about the way Caleb and Blaze were glancing at each other. She couldn't quite figure it out. "Let's play some b-ball," Asher suddenly shouted, tossing the basketball he had been carrying into the air, breaking the awkward silence that had begun as Grace, Blaze and Caleb all stared at each other. "Sounds great, Asher," Caleb exclaimed. "Come on Grace. And Blaze, why don't you join us? That would make it 2-on-2. "Would love to. Although it's been about 8 years since I've played." "It was 8 years ago since you played?" Grace queried. "Well, not exactly ago," Blaze laughed. "You might even say it seems like just the other day." They were soon all at play on the basketball court. It was Caleb and Grace versus Asher and Blaze. Basketball was a sport that Caleb enjoyed, he just wasn't very consistent when it came to shooting. Grace, on the other hand, seemed to have lots of natural talent for dribbling and shooting. The game seemed quite evenly matched to start, but then Blaze started sinking three-point shots every time he picked up the ball. Nothing but net. His shots never touched the rim. "I thought Blaze said it has been 8 years since he played," grumbled Grace to Caleb as they once again got the ball after being scored on, "but it sure doesn't look like it." "Well, I happen to know he's telling the truth," Caleb began, "but it's a little hard to explain. Blaze is in a rather unique time and place in his life right now. I'm sure he'll share at some point." Secretly, Caleb was thrilled. Obviously sometime in the next 8 years, he would find time to become an excellent basketball player. He could hardly wait. Caleb could not remember the last time he had had so much fun. The time just melted away and soon they were saying goodbye to his friends and heading home. After dinner he watched Video A5, learning tasks, and then began to organize his work.